I'm Tony Lockwood, founder of Thompson Wright Partners, and I'm delighted to welcome you to the latest episode of Inside Track, where I discuss business transformation journeys with leading figures in industry. Since starting this podcast almost 12 months ago, we have been able to share experiences across many sectors. And although each sector has its own unique elements, the consistency in what works and most importantly, what doesn't work is fascinating to see. In the first episode of 2021, Troy shared his experiences within the social housing sector. And today we will continue this theme as I'm joined by Elly Hoult, who has operated within the sector for the entirety of her career across both operational and transformational roles. Let me introduce you to her now. Thanks, Elly. Thanks for agreeing to join us today. Throughout your career, you have operated just within the social housing sector, I think. So as you provide us with a little bit of background on your career to date, maybe you can answer a couple of questions. What attracted you to the sector in the first place? And how has that sector changed over the years that you've been operating in it?
Sure. So, when I first went into the workplace, I did actually work for a short time in the private sector, but it was a very short stint. And a role came up at what was my local housing association then, Chilwell Housing Trust, back in 2000. It was just an admin type role, so I kind of drifted into housing. And at that time, it was during the Blair government around 2000,
Mm-hmm.
and there was a lot of resources and money around that was being put into supported housing. And I was really fascinated by the supported housing officer roles that were within Chilwell Housing Trust. And an opportunity came up for me to train to be a supported housing officer, which I loved. It was working within a mother and baby unit for some time, and then with young offenders, which I particularly enjoyed. And it really did provide positive outcomes on the whole because of the amount of time that you could spend with individuals. So I guess I accidentally came upon social housing, although it's not a surprise. Many of my family members work within the third or public sector and in vocational type roles, and I consider housing a vocational role. So that was my sort of entry into the sector, I guess. I think you asked me about how it had changed.
Yeah, how it had changed over
Yeah.
20 years then,
Yeah, a lot. So I think I alluded to the fact that under the Blair government there was we'd had kind of decent homes, and the supported people money that was around. I guess we've seen much more of a move towards commercial organisations. With the reduction in grant funding, we need to cross-subsidise social housing through different means. So housing associations have adapted to become more effective businesses. I mean, they've certainly become a lot larger. So the first housing association I started in had around 3,000 homes, and it went through 2 mergers whilst I was there to become what was one of the biggest housing associations at the time, A2 Dominion. I think from memory, I had about 28,000 homes, and I now work for Notting Hill Genesis, which has 64,000, and we're not the biggest. There are some that are kind of over 100,000 homes. So we've seen growth, we've seen commercialisation, and housing associations are really good at adapting to change. So I guess those are the kind of the big changes that we've seen.
Yeah, I've done quite a bit of work in housing associations over the last few years, and as you say, it's the amount of change that the sector has gone through has been immense, as you say, going from relatively lots and lots of smaller organisations, locally driven organisations, community-based organisations, to these, as you say, national organisations now, certainly a lot of regional players. And that complete mix from originally being social housing providers to a mixture of now of between social and private rented in houses for sale, that completely different dynamic within the organisation, different skill sets that are required. How do you think people have adapted to that?
I mean, I think we are very agile. We've always been subject to change throughout my career, anyway. I must say, in the last probably 3 years, I've seen more change than I have in the previous 17 years, and that has proved more difficult, I think, and that comes from not just the changes that we are seeing in policy and regulation, and the fallout from the tragedy of Grenfell and building safety, but equally just the pace of change around technology and digital, and what our residents and customers are expecting from us in terms of what we can provide. So it's coming from quite a few different angles.
Yeah.
I think we adapt well, we employ really good people, we employ people that care, and I think that is a really that's the strength of the sector that we work in, and why I love it so much. But equally, you can't really make change quickly unless you care about what you're doing. And that's something I really value.
Totally agree, and it's definitely noticeable, having worked in, like I say, across social housing organisations, and then you go into organisations in different sectors, and the degree of caring about what you deliver and how you deliver, and the passion that you see that within social housing organisations are, I wouldn't say black and white, but black and grey, certainly. So you've obviously, or throughout your career, you've moved between change stroke transformation type roles and then more operational focus roles. Which have you enjoyed the most?
Yeah, so I kind of went, I guess, from a fairly hands-on operational role into project management, and then into a series of change roles, which led me to leading the merger between Notting Hill and Genesis. And I now am back in an operational role, albeit at a strategic level. I think both have their merits. I really do value, from an operational perspective, that really being close to residents, and really you don't have that as much in the transformational roles, although you perhaps recreate the same relationship with staff. So that people focus is really important, and probably the continuum between both different types of roles. I think I learned an awful lot, ironically, at the very beginning of my career, when I was working with young people about changing the way they live their lives and supporting them to change the way they live their lives, that I took into working with colleagues and people about managing them through the change process. And then the things that I learned through delivering large-scale change programs, I've now taken back into operations. So it is very much chicken and egg, I think.
Yeah.
Both have their merits.
But as you say, the commonality is taking people on that journey, whether it's a personal journey or whether it's a journey within the business construct. It's still making people or helping people to transition from doing one thing to doing something different. And a lot of that sort of transformation focus comes down to the people, and it's the people that determine whether or not it's going to be successful in most cases.
It is. I mean, there is a sort of, I'm sure people have heard the adage: if you put a good person into a bad process, the person will fail. Equally, I've not actually. There's a kind of a bit of a myth that people go to work and there's people that kind of want to do things badly, or they're putting a spanner in the works, or they're kind of throwing things over the fence. Actually, that's not been my experience. Most people I've met have wanted to go to work and do a really good job and do care, but maybe there are things that prevent them from doing that in the function or the framework or the way things are set up. So I do think people are at the heart of getting people on board with an idea or with a change, or at the heart of kind of making it successful. But you do have to look a little bit at process as well.
Of course, yeah. And as you say, you've got to accept that when people don't like change generally, they're happy. A lot of people are happy to go through it once they understand what the future looks like. But as soon as you start mentioning things are going to change around here, you almost get the initial response is, "What's that going to mean to me?"
Yeah.
And when, I suppose, as a nation in UK in particular, we're probably more pessimistic than optimistic generally. So we always think the worst of things rather than the best of things. But once you've overcome that, then I find that people will come on the journey, and will enjoy that journey, and especially if they can get involved in planning that journey in the first instance.
Yeah, I mean, I think people. You're right. I think change can be quite frightening for people, and actually even people that say, "Oh, I love change, I embrace it." You see through the process. For everybody, it's something different. And one of the things that the merger taught me was the difficult there is for leadership going through that process. So leaders have to be seen to be leading the change and embracing the change at the same time as they're experiencing their own feelings of loss or fear or worry.
Yeah.
But they're expected to kind of contain that and to still kind of lead from the fore and be enthusiastic. So I think certainly one of the things I learned, particularly through a merger where you're bringing two different cultures, although it can apply in every scenario, even right down to a very small process where you might have two different ways of working, is that you really need to work with those people that are going to be the leaders that will take people through that process. If you don't get managers or leaders on board, it will fail. I haven't had an experience that's gone well where that work hasn't been done up front.
No, agreed. And I find that it's the middle managers that can be the most challenging, because the senior managers tend to know what's going to happen and what the likely outcomes are. The uncertainties in that middle management bracket, and the uncertainty breeds frustration, breeds sort of, as you say, concern and worry, and trying to manage that through a change program, whether that's a merger or whether that's anything really, is challenging.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest mistakes that organisations make or people make when they, exactly as you've alluded to around middle managers, is not sharing information soon enough. There's actually very little that needs to be kept secret unless there's some sort of confidentiality arrangement. Actually, most things can be shared as soon as you're kind of clear on what you're sharing up front, and the more communication you do, the better. And even if you say, actually, we're working on this, but we don't quite know yet, and we'll come back to you with an answer in a week. We haven't really worked out what that piece will look like, but we want to work with you, but we need to just get our heads around it. It's actually okay to say that, and it's better to say that than to say nothing and then sort of launch something on people.
Totally agree. It's being honest with people, isn't it? And
it is.
And people can accept that you won't have the answers straight away. And as long as you're telling them that, well, this is what we're doing, and by this point, we expect to be able to come back and tell you what's happening. They respect that, and they'll understand that, and they'll go along with that in the main. So.
Yeah.
Coming back to the merge, I'm quite keen just to explore that your experience in that, really. So was it a true merger, or was it a takeover named a merger? If you know what I mean.
It was a merger of equals. So interestingly, both Genesis Housing and Notting Hill Housing started in similar parts of London at a similar time, addressing a similar issue, and grew in similar geography in a very similar pace. So it was almost kind of a no-brainer, really, that at some point we would merge, although it hadn't happened previously. I mean, like most mergers, the CEO of our merger was Notting Hill CEO, and with that, when you get the leader from one organisation, then they are likely to bring with them a culture that they influence.
Yeah.
So, and I think it's important to understand that up front, and to not be frightened to have those conversations around, something that is obvious. It's pretty obvious that would that the CEO influences culture. So there may be more of a lilt one way or the other, depending on how it goes. The other thing that was really important through the Notting Hill Genesis merger was the way decisions we made around things like IT systems. So if before I did the merger, it felt like quite a, it's just this IT system. What's the big deal? Actually, people are really attached to things, and there might be reasons why you might keep one system over another because of the amount of investment you've already put in, or it might be more future proof. So again, it's kind of all of that explanation around why every decision is made is important. And if 70% of the decisions are one organization than another, it might not be because it's a takeover. There's always, in my view, a rationale which is to do with kind of value for money, or the most sensible thing for the future. I haven't experienced any decisions that have been made just because, well, we've always liked it like that. So but I think the perception could be there if you don't head it off.
Absolutely. I think the challenge with sometimes with mergers, though, is that you don't get those final decisions. You don't get, well, actually, to be able to collectively move forward together, we've just got to go with one way. So it's a binary choice. There's a temptation to try to merge the processes to be the best that you can get between the two, and that can be really problematic in the long term. So I found that the successful mergers have been where they've just said, okay, on this technology, we're going to all go to this technology because that's what we're going to base it on, or this process is going to be the process that we go to, as opposed to doing that sort of merging of stuff during the transformation. Because once you've done it and you've got everyone operating on the same way, then you can improve and then you can move things forward.
Absolutely. I think the other thing as well is like understanding quite quickly what you do want to consult on and what you actually are just going to make a decision on. Because if you sort of know, well, we're going to do with this, but we're going to do like sort of consultation, actually people will see through that straight away. So you may as well just say, we're making this decision for that reason and we're not consulting because of X, or actually this is something we can give to the staff to decide which is the best way. Or an example might be in our merger would where we're going to have our offices probably wouldn't be up for consultation with staff, because that will likely be a decision around value for money and financial decision. But perhaps how the office is laid out or how people want to work, that was something that we could consult with staff on. So I think understanding that and revisiting it all the time is quite important.
Absolutely. And what was the cultures like? Were they similar cultures, or were they quite different?
I think they were quite different. I did a lot of reading prior to the actual go live date around mergers, and everyone always talks about culture, and I hadn't really read a case study where somebody had said that the cultures were really similar or the same and they'd blended beautifully. And I think it's a bit like having two maybe step families coming together. Even if you've got similar interests, you're going to have different ways of doing things. They were different, and that provided some challenges, particularly around the way that we worked. So one organisation had a much more flexible approach to how they worked to another. And actually, when you're talking about things like how you working from home, flexible working, and I don't mean flexible working in the statutory sense, you might be talking about people's work-life balance, and so then people start to really feel anxious. So those types of things really need to be dealt with quite sensitively, and those are the sorts of things that you take your time over. They're maybe not things that you rush.
No, I totally agree. It's I haven't come across an organisation that's merged with another one and there's not been cultural differences. I think it's whether they are virtually identical, there'll be some language or some element that will be different, and that if you don't identify those and proactively look to at least go through the process of understanding those differences and working out the best way of resolving them. They certainly can come back to bite you at some stage in the future if you're not careful. And it's fascinating. I think sometimes you go into organisations that have merged years ago, and can still see, because of the behaviour and the language they use, which organisation they came from.
Yeah, I've seen that for myself firsthand. Yeah, not at Notting Hill Genesis, but in other organisations. I'm sure, you know, I think, you know, at the very beginning it was quite noticeable, but over time, you know, certainly I feel like we're one organisation now, which is great.
Good. So, you know, transformation or change should always look to deliver value. But I find it at times, certainly in the short term, that sort of drive to demonstrate the value sometimes gets lost, because other projects come along and you move on to a different focus. What have you done to ensure, or what do you do, should I say, to ensure that you can demonstrate that you've delivered the original business case, that you know, when you got sign off for doing whatever project or improvement activity?
Yeah, so we had like a really quite a big target to meet in terms of kind of savings, and also kind of bringing teams together. So we set ourselves like a target, a 2-year target, and I think it was about £20 million worth of savings, and we stuck to it kind of rigorously. And I think the point of everybody understood what the target was in the whole business, you know, right down to the frontline stuff, and we kind of ruthlessly, you know, went and drove towards achieving those savings and making sure that we kind of merged. There were other things that we so the 2-year was about getting to those savings and getting us merged, getting our IT systems in place and the teams integrated. We're probably now in the process of saying, okay, we've merged, we're one organisation. Now what is the organisation that we want to be?
Yeah.
So there's kind of Notting Hill Genesis merged, then there's 2 years of delivering the business case and working out what we need to do to come together. And now we're in a place to say who are we now? What's emerged from the merger? But I think in answer to your question, it's just having a really clear vision, everybody behind it, and consistently going back and revisiting it.
Yeah, and I think the key thing about that was when you said you communicated it very, very clearly up front. So you set the ambition, you set the target. Everybody knew what that was, and then you, as you progress through, you reported against it. So there was no surprises for people, and that's a really good best practice, I think, and one that a lot of organisations can learn from.
There was just one more thing that springs to mind around pace. So pace is so important. We had a sort of a mantra of as fast as possible and as slow as necessary.
Right.
And there were things that we just needed to get done. But then there were times where maybe we felt actually maybe we're pushing this a little bit hard and we aren't bringing people with us. So we just need to step back and slow down a little bit. And it's that constant kind of turning the taps on and off to keep driving forwards, but making sure that you're taking people with you.
And what did you put in place to check that out? Because as a program team or you know, the stakeholders, it's easy just to get very sort of siloed thinking, and you're going along this path, and you know, it's very easy not to see those signs. Did you put anything in place to?
Yeah. So specifically, we had a meeting every single week with the relevant sort of project leads from the business, and it was a long meeting, and we went through it was like 3 hours, and we'd go through everything and kind of update and make sure that everything was on track. And I guess part of that conversation was also you'd be observing how people were feeling, whether you felt that things were getting on top of people a bit too much within different parts of the business. So it was very much a practical kind of where are we with projects, but actually the emotions would come out in the room, so you could keep a bit of a temperature check.
Yeah.
Running alongside that, we did an enormous amount of work with our newly formed directors group, heads of service group, and exec directors group around culture and how we work together collectively and collaboratively. So it was much more of the softer side, and I think that those two things are what enabled us to deliver the vision and the business case as we set out to do so.
Yeah, no, I can absolutely understand that. I think that investment in those teams, those newly formed teams, how they can work most effectively together, and building that awareness of the different strengths and weaknesses and different ways of communication, and helping each other to understand, I suppose, maybe, well, with this person, that they want to be much more direct, they want to be much more sort of much more sort of specific in the information that you provide them. You need to get to know that, especially when you're putting new teams together. So the more effort and more input that you can do in building those teams in the first place, the benefits will have started to shine through, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only other thing probably to add was around creating quite a safe environment. So we made it really okay for people to say, I don't know the answer. Like, it was, our CEO and our exec would regularly say, this is new to us as well. So we're going to, that doesn't mean that, we're completely naive, but we're going to go through this process together, when we might make mistakes, but that's okay. And we'll learn as we go. And I think there's something quite comforting, actually, and there's something that makes people feel quite secure when people are prepared to say that, rather than kind of feel that there's like a hidden agenda, or they don't know what they're doing, or people would easily fill the gaps.
Yeah, it's having that grown-up environment, isn't it? And no one can know all of the answers all of the time.
Yeah.
But it takes a brave person to admit, in some cases, that they don't know, especially the more senior you become, because the expectation is that people look up to the chief exec and, well, you should know what we're doing. But at the converse is actually, the more you can get other people engaged and involved in making those decisions, or having an input in making those decisions, the more ownership the rest of the team have, and it helps actually deliver against it. So
absolutely.
Yeah, interesting. So in terms of in not just in the merger, but on all of your sort of projects and change initiatives that you've done, what do you think are the essentials to get in place to ensure that success?
I think I've sort of alluded to this already, but you need to have a really strong vision, and you need to constantly communicate, and as soon as you can, don't keep things secret, and be open and honest. I think don't lose sight of why. It's so easy to get focused on how, and how difficult it is, but actually it's really important to go back and say, what was the principle, why did we say we were going to do this? Because of X, Y, and Z. And that can be really helpful, actually, especially if people are starting to feel a bit bogged down by it all. I think you need to find your star players, and there's absolutely no two ways about it that through change programs, particularly large scale ones, are really exhausting, and they do require people to do extra hours, and they do require people to push the extra mile, and you're probably going to have to rely on some really key individuals to do that, and you need to make sure that they're well looked after through that process. And I suppose the other point that I haven't already made would be not to wait for perfection. So it's very tempting to never make change, because there are many reasons not to do it, or to well, it's not quite ready yet, or we can't launch it yet, or we need this and this. And I think the recent pandemic that we found ourselves in has demonstrated that we can do change very, very quickly, if we want to, when there's a burning platform. So it's kind of almost artificially creating that, if you need to allow for change to land.
So you alluded to sort of the stress of driving change, and that can be stressful, certainly for anybody who's in the organisation that's going through that. But it can absolutely be stressful for the people that are in the team, because, as you say, their expectations and the hours and the pressure that they put under, especially if they're also doing a day job, can be immense. So, what do you do, and what's your sort of stress alleviation technique as such?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably a quite common and obvious answer, but exercise is really important for me, particularly since we've been in lockdown. I've been at the gym, I've been going outside to get some fresh air, and I think actually that's a really good way for me to de-stress, just to remove myself from the scenario, and just get a change of scene, and helps me to get a bit more creative. The other thing, which again is something I found in extremely difficult actually at the moment, is that I'm a real sociable person, and I get my energy from other people. And certainly the second lockdown I found quite hard, and so it demonstrated to me that the way I manage my stress is through being around people. And I've been back in London this week, which has been fantastic. And yeah, so I think those, being with others and exercise, are probably the two ways that I use the most to manage my stress.
Right, which is interesting, isn't it? Because a lot of people, when they become stressed, will almost revert into themselves and not go into a shell, but as you say, just move away from people. And but it's good that you obviously notice that actually the best way that you find is that exercise and that sociability. That sort of self-awareness is so important in understanding how you can alleviate those stressful situations.
I think there's something about kind of, I mean, probably do a little bit of reflection and stuff as well, but this, for me, the way I reflect and deal with stress is sort of bouncing it off of others. So that, and I only really realized that when I've, through this period where I've been stressed and I haven't had that outlet.
Right. Yeah, it's been an interesting time. I think a lot of people have learned a hell of a lot about themselves. They've learned a massive amount about their abilities as an organisation, and their abilities to deliver change. Because, as you say, if we go back to, well, probably as late as the first week of March, if you'd said to people, well, within the next month, the vast majority of people will be working from home, and we'll be doing lots of our team meetings and such on this thing called Zoom or Teams, people would just have laughed at you, and suddenly the whole world changed within such a short period of time. And I think it'd be interesting to see if when we go back to whatever new normal looks like, and it's a dreadful term, but it'd be interesting to see just how organisations grab hold of that ability and say, actually, we can do a lot more now moving forward than we ever thought we could do, in terms of our ability to take on change and adapt to change very, very quickly.
Yeah, I think that's right. And actually, if you look at any change program, which what we've been discussing today, you can quite often make, and I've seen it a few times with kind of lean processes, you can make some really significant change and turn processes around, and then 6 months later you go back and it's just back to how it was. And I always feel quite sad about that, where it hasn't embedded, because you've lost perhaps some of the benefits that could have been there. I don't particularly want to spend another 6 months in this small room in my house looking at a screen. Equally, I think it would be sad if we don't bring some of the benefits that it brings, which might be things like a better work-life balance, or the ability to manage your workload in a slightly different way. If we lost that, that would be a shame, I think. So I do think that some sort of hybrid, or some learning from what we've picked up would be helpful.
Yeah, I think it's about getting balance, isn't it? And what's right for you won't be right for somebody else. So it's about, as an organisation, being able to provide the workplace that's right for the team as individuals, as well as a team as a whole. Because some people, as you say, maybe don't even have the environment at home that they could work effectively from home in the long term. But a lot of people like the idea of working from home for maybe 1 or 2 days a week, but as you say, want to have those conversations around the coffee, around the kitchen, or whatever that you get, and that sociability that you get by working into the office. So I think it's key to be flexible enough that people can feel comfortable with that flexibility moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's right.
I usually end this with, what's your one takeaway?
Yeah.
So I suspect I might know what that is, bearing in mind that we've mentioned it a few times. What, of everything that you've learned in terms of managing transformation and change, what is that one takeaway?
Well, I've spoken quite a lot about people and the importance of people and bringing them with you, but I probably haven't mentioned about when people don't want to come with you.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the one takeaway for me is you have to really, really care about the end goal, and you have to really strive to get to where you need to be. Otherwise, you may as well not bother trying to make the change if that's not your mantra.
Yeah.
But you also have to accept that no matter how hard you try and however much you put in, and there will always be some people that don't want to come on that journey.
Yeah.
And that's okay. That's okay for them, and that's okay for you. And I think that's probably my takeaway. It is a people business, but not everybody may see things in the same way that you do.
No, absolutely. Well, thank you very much, Elly. Thanks for your time, and yeah, let's keep in touch.
Thank you. Thanks, Tony.
Cheers. Thanks, Elly. It's always a pleasure to discuss the sector with you. Some really interesting insights on this show, don't you think? I just love the approach, own pace, as fast as possible, but as slow as necessary. I'm sure we can all integrate this thinking. If you want to share your experiences, please do get in touch. Equally, if you're interested in building your network with like-minded people within change and transformation, I'd encourage you to check out the Transformation Leaders Hub. It really is a thriving community that continues to grow exponentially month on month. See the link below. With that, thanks for listening, and I'll see you in a couple of weeks.